Honestly here from IDA. I'm just
okay, just a second.
Here. Wait a second. So it's recording, Marina. Thanks very much.
Oh, ok. So, let's start. Bom dia a todos e todas. Damos início agora ao segundo AbraTalks, uma série de webinars sobre internacionalização. Realizamos o primeiro semana passada, focado na região de Flandres, na Bélgica, e hoje o país convidado para apresentar seu ambiente de negócio é a Irlanda. O AbraTalks, Oportunidades para Estúdios de Games e Animação na Irlanda, é uma realização da Abra Games e do Brasil Games, em parceria com a IDA Ireland, agência do governo irlandês para a promoção de investimentos. Antes de convidar o Conor Shee, vice-presidente de mercados emergentes do IDA Irlanda, para abrir o evento, gostaria de dar alguns recados. Primeiro, câmeras e microfones devem estar desligados durante a apresentação. Haverá espaço para perguntas e respostas no final. E quando vocês forem perguntar no chat, por favor, indique para quem vocês estão fazendo a pergunta. É isso aí. Agora é com você, Sandra. Muito obrigada. Bem-vindo a todos os participantes.
Thanks very much, Marina. And I'm going to speak in English. Unfortunately, my Portuguese is non-existent, but thanks very much for hosting this, Marina, on behalf of everyone at Abra Games. And thanks everyone for joining. So just for the next 45 minutes to an hour, essentially just have this session just to showcase Ireland as a tech hub and a bit about the game scene here. And there's going to be a couple of speakers. I'm going to start off and talk a bit just at a high level about Ireland. IDA Ireland, the agency that I work with, the tech scene here, and then we're going to pass on to two other speakers, Ronan McCabe, who's head of Animation Ireland, to talk about the animation scene in Ireland and everything that's going on from a creative and audiovisual perspective. And then finally, we have Brenda Romero, who is COO at Romero Games, and who's a seasoned professional in the games development space, to talk about locating to Ireland and setting up their games company, Romero Games, in Galway. So I'm just going to pull up a few slides. Just bear with me a second, please. And there will be opportunity for Q&A at the end. So let me know if, can everyone see that okay? I'm just going to go through these slides. Excellent, thanks very much. And rest assured, I only have 6 slides, and this won't be a death by PowerPoint session. I just thought it would be useful just to provide that high-level overview, and just conscious that some of the people on the call mightn't be overly familiar with Ireland and what's going on from a games development perspective or the tech scene. So I've been promised that I'm the only speaker using PowerPoint, and the other 2 speakers will just be speaking. So we'll keep it fun and engaging, and looking forward to a bit of Q&A at the end. So just a bit about me. I head up our Latin America team in IDA Ireland, the Irish government's foreign direct investment agency. Delighted to be here today, and again, just going to provide a high-level overview of Ireland. So for those of you who mightn't be very familiar with Ireland, where is Ireland? So as you can see from that fairly crude map on the right of the slide, we're located on the western edge of Europe, just off the coast of Great Britain. From a size perspective, we're fairly small. We're not as large as Brazil, a population of about 5 million or so in the Republic of Ireland. We've been a member of the EU since 1973. We're English-speaking, member of the Eurozone. Some of you guys might know our capital city, Dublin. It's our largest city, just over 1 million or so inhabitants. And there's a number of other cities located across Ireland, the likes of Cork and Galway and Limerick, whereas Dublin is the epicenter of tech in Ireland. There's some really cool things happening in some of these other cities in Cork and Galway and Limerick, for example. And Ireland, as I mentioned, a small country. By motorway, you can get to Dublin on the east coast, to Galway, which is a city on the west coast, in under 2 hours, and Dublin down to Cork in the very south of Ireland in about 2.5 hours. So it's not an overly large place. So IDA Ireland, who are we? We're the Foreign Direct Investment Agency of Ireland. We're 100% funded by the Irish government, and essentially our role is to attract and win foreign direct investment into Ireland. So we work with companies across the globe, across a range of sectors, across technology, online media, financial services, life sciences, engineering, who were looking at establishing an international base and getting them to establish operations in Ireland. Over 1,500 collectively, they employ almost 250,000 people. So proportionally, it's quite high in terms of the overall workforce in Ireland. Again, across a range of sectors, across technology, financial services, areas like pharmaceuticals and medical devices, and engineering. So why have all of these companies set up operations in Ireland? I think it's fair to say it's typically a combination of factors, and I just thought I'd pull together this slide just to highlight some of those at a high level. Firstly, track record. And what do I mean by that? Ireland has a long track record of attracting international investment into Ireland, and companies that are looking at internationalizing, looking at a base in Europe, choosing Ireland. Geopolitically, Ireland is a very stable location. We're a small open economy. Over decades, we've set up economic policies to help attract and streamline international investment into Ireland. We're a committed member of the EU. And I feel that's really important, particularly in recent times when we're seeing a lot of geopolitical instability and companies or countries, larger economies going down a somewhat protectionist route. So that's very important for companies forward planning, looking at a medium to long-term perspective, that either economic policies or situation in the country won't be changing dramatically. Secondly, talent. So tying into that, I guess it's twofold. So from an Ireland perspective, very good education system, consistently ranks among the top 10 in the world. And also being an EU member, we have access to skills, talent all across the EU. There's 27 countries that are members of the EU, and all of those folks can come and live and work in Ireland. And many of them do. They come and live and work for some of the top multinationals and other scaling startups who have set up here. We also have a flexible employment and visa system. So essentially, the government has taken the decision, we're pro-immigration of skilled personnel from all over the world. We want the best and brightest folks to come and live and work in Ireland. Many of these people are citizens from outside the EU, and we can help fast-track visas. Just on the tax side, many of you may be aware that Ireland has a low corporate tax rate of 12.5%. It's very competitive. This was set up by the Irish government about 20 years ago, essentially to heighten Ireland's attractiveness as a location for inward investment. Set up as an economic stimulus. Ireland, we're a small country. We don't have very large indigenous industries. We're quite heavily reliant on foreign investment. So again, setting a clear, transparent headline corporate tax rate at that level is advantageous. And then finally, and I've mentioned it already, just a bit about our EU membership. Being a committed member of the EU and the Eurozone, it's extremely important to Ireland and Ireland's economy. And again, we're a committed member of the EU. And unlike the UK, and many of you may be aware that the UK is in the process of leaving the EU, and Brexit negotiations are still taking place. I think in any event, Ireland is such a small country that we kind of realize it would be economic suicide to leave the EU. So again, from an international investment perspective and companies looking at an EU base, Ireland certainly ticks a lot of boxes. So just thought I'd highlight at a high level about the tech scene in Ireland, and Ireland as a global tech hub, and certainly something that has developed over recent years. And you'll recognize a lot of the logos on the right-hand side of the screen, albeit they're quite small. But again, just trying to showcase the scale of all of this investment into Ireland. There's over 1,000 technology companies with significant operations in Ireland. You'll see there on the left-hand side of the screen, most of the top online properties, internet properties, software and hardware companies have significant operations in Ireland. The likes of Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. Collectively, these companies employ thousands of people, not only in Dublin, but other cities around Ireland, like Cork and Limerick and Galway. Most recently, TikTok have established operations in Ireland. So about 2 months ago, TikTok took the decision to establish a EU trust and safety hub in Ireland. And again, Ireland being a member of the EU was very important in that decision, that they could regulate their data privacy from a pan-EU perspective. And now they're in the process of establishing a data center in Ireland. Another really cool statistic there in the bottom left, Ireland is actually the second largest exporter of software in the world. So for such a small country, we're certainly punching above our weight in that regard. And then this is the final slide. I promised I wouldn't be too overboard with the PowerPoint. I just thought it'd be important just to now talk a bit about the international game scene in Ireland. I'm just highlighting here some of the large international games companies with operations in Ireland across console, mobile games, esports, some of the leading players in their respective fields. And you'll see some of the leading US players, the EA Games, the Activision Blizzards of the world, Riot Games in the esports space, now owned by China's Tencent Holdings. What we've been doing in recent times is working with companies across new markets for us. So a couple of interesting companies, the likes of Playrix and Kama Games, they're two Russian companies that we helped with to establish operations in Ireland to serve international markets in recent times. And of course, given this is a Brazil-focused webinar, many of you will be very familiar with Wildlife Studios. You can see the logo on the left. They've been doing extremely well, and I think their current valuation is over 3 billion. They're certainly well in the unicorn status now. We worked with Wildlife Studios back in January of 2019, and they established an international operations center in Dublin. And over the period of about a year and a half, they've ramped up to 60 or so staff across engineering and localization, across multilingual customer technical support, and across publishing and distribution. And from speaking with them and management leadership at Wildlife Studios, you know, just for some of what I touched on around Ireland being a member of the EU and access to talent, competitive corporate tax rate, and also being in close proximity to the international headquarters of the likes of Google and Apple and Facebook was extremely important in their investment decision to locate in Ireland. So I'll leave it there at the moment for the PowerPoint. I hope that was interesting, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And again, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So again, I'd welcome any questions you may have. I'd now like to hand you over to Ronan McCabe, who's our second speaker. And Ronan is CEO of Animation Ireland. Ireland is Ireland's trade body representing Ireland's animation studios. Ronan's a seasoned executive across media. He's been a leading producer of Irish content for decades. He spent over 20 years as managing director of Double Z Enterprises here in Ireland. They've produced shows for RTE, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and MTV. And he's also former chairperson of Screen Producers Ireland. So I'd just like to hand over to Ronan now.
Obrigado, Conor. Bom dia a todos. I'm afraid that's the height of my Portuguese, but I thought I'd better make a bit of an effort. Thanks for the introduction, Conor. I'm going to give you guys maybe just a brief history of Irish animation. Ireland had no tradition of animation right up until the 1980s, but we were traditionally good storytellers. And our animation story started with a company called Sullivan Bluth when an ex-Walt Disney executive left Disney and decided to set up in Ireland back in the 1980s, a guy called Don Bluth. That company lasted for 5 or 6 years, and eventually, unfortunately, it went under. But all of the people who worked there, following its demise, they were sort of left in Ireland, and they said, well, we better do something. So they started their own animation companies. Now that's going back about 25 years ago, and some of those companies have become large international players like Brown Bag and Boulder and Cartoon Saloon. And what we find now is their former staff are now setting up their own companies, and we have like a third generation or a third wave of animation studios starting up. So it's well established now in Ireland, and it's 50% of all production in Ireland, all production funding in Ireland is animation. We have about 2,000 employees in the sector, 34 studios. And you're looking at about 375 million euro in business. In terms of what animation studios in Ireland do, it's a mix of service work and original IP. Irish companies are very successful internationally and have garnered themselves multiple Emmys and IFTAs and BAFTAs, and we've also been nominated for 6 Academy Awards over the years. So we're punching above our weight for, as Conor said, for a small island off Europe. We're doing pretty well. As well as that top tier of companies, then we have a second tier. I don't know whether I should do a football analogy or not, but like you have your Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and then below that, then we're into sort of the Paraguays and the Chiles. And those companies probably have about 50 seats in terms of the number of animators working for them. The bigger companies have up to 300 or 400. Their funding is mostly European and Canadian co-productions, and we're aiming really at the European markets that haven't, a lot of them haven't quite cracked the international stage yet. And then below that, again, there's a third tier of companies with, maybe a core of 4 or 5 people in them. And a lot of them tend to be ideas companies. So it's people getting together, developing their own IP, and then using that IP to maybe leverage a deal with one of the larger animation companies to do a service level agreement or a production services agreement to actually get the animation made. Animation Ireland, as a representative body, started off quite informally as a CEO get together. Sort of people wanted to share their ideas, see where they're going, and about 5 years ago we decided to formalize it, and we set up Animation Ireland 5 years ago. The role of Animation Ireland is we liaise with all the stakeholders in Ireland and Europe and around the world, and we lobby the Irish government directly, and then we also lobby Europe through our connections with Animation in Europe and the Pan-European producers organization called CEPI. We have a fairly sophisticated ecosystem in Ireland in terms of funding. So as well as the IDA, who you guys obviously know, there's another company, Enterprise Ireland, which looks on the export side. So it sells Irish companies here, export our ideas abroad. We have a development agency called Screen Ireland, which helps to fund both development and production. And we have a very sophisticated tax credit. It can bring up to 32% of your budget to a project, and it actually works really well in co-production, because the tax credit is limited to it's 32% of 80% of your budget, or 32% of the overall the Irish spend. So it works far better when you have a co-producer on board. In terms of the pluses of being in Ireland, well, we have access to the European jobs market, which is fantastic. If you go into any of the Irish studios, it's like a United Nations. There are people from all over the world working in the studios, and again, from all over Europe. And if necessary, as Conor said there, we can organise work permits for anyone outside of that who needs to come and work here as well. We're English speaking. The weather is not great, obviously, as you know that, but 20,000 Brazilians, I looked it up last night, 20,000 Brazilians have chosen to live in Ireland, so we must be doing something right. We love our football, and I was looking at what Conor was saying there. I say even Sao Paulo, one of your districts, is about 3.5 times the size of Ireland, just to give you some idea. Ireland is very outward looking because of our history, and our producers, couldn't possibly fund animation in Ireland because of the size of the market. So we're open for business, and we're always looking to meet new producer companies and new countries to engage with. And I look forward to any questions that you might have after this. Thank you.
That's great, Ronan. Thank you very much. I just now like to hand you over to Brenda Romero, our third speaker. So Brenda was born and raised in the US. She's an award-winning game designer, Fulbright scholar, entrepreneur, artist, writer, and creative director. So just your perennial underachiever. She is the recipient of the 2013 Women in Games Lifetime Achievement Award, awarded by Microsoft. And she's currently COO of Romero Games in Galway. Romero Games is a BAFTA award-winning game studio that was established in Galway in 2015 by Brenda and her husband, John Romero. So we're delighted to have her here with us today. And Brenda, I'll hand it over to you. I think you're on mute, Brenda. think that's certainly the term of 2020. You're on mute.
Oh my goodness! And
Such
I'm like
a webinar term.
And I'm the queen of it. It never fails. You'd think I would have gotten it down by now, but you would be wrong. Well, clearly you wouldn't be wrong because you just saw it happen live. So I'm Brenda Romero, and as you can tell, I was born in the U.S. And we made the decision to move from Silicon Valley, which is really, I guess all my time growing up, that is sort of the epicenter of games, at least to me. And so I moved from Silicon Valley to Ireland, to the west coast of Ireland, and I'll talk a little bit about why we did that. Especially as a games company, I feel like I have the firsthand experience of why this was a good thing to do. So I'll answer the obvious question, which is how did we end up here in Ireland? So my husband and I, John, we worked on many games. I would say probably the most notable of all of them is John's Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake, Heretic, Hexen. So John really kicks off first-person shooters, and we're currently building a game called Empire of Sin that's set for launch here at the end of the year, well, fall 2020. We have a studio which is about 30 employees now. We will be looking to grow by a further 70 employees in the coming year. So why did we even come to Ireland? So if we go back to 2014, I won something called a Fulbright Fellowship to come here and study Ireland's game scene. So at the time, we have an office back in Silicon Valley. It was a great opportunity to come to Ireland. My family is originally from here. So I hadn't been here, so I wanted to come over and see it. So what a great opportunity. So I'm here for 6 weeks, not 6 weeks, sorry. I was here for 12 weeks, drove all over the place, met with people from, everybody from Microsoft to people at Digit, to people at government institutions, funding bodies, IDA, met with Enterprise Ireland as well. And at the end of all of this, I head back to the US, and my job is simple. I just need to write a report about what I've learned. So I do. It's 55 pages, and I submit it. And the side effect of this wasn't supposed to be that I would write the report and have basically convinced myself, like, this is actually really a great place to be. Why aren't we there? But that's actually the effect that it had. So, like crazy people, we sold everything we owned, shut our business down, and started a new business here on the west coast of Ireland. So we did, like I imagine you would do, some research into different locations. And I would say I often am asked, is there a perfect location in Ireland? And the answer is yes. But that perfect location depends on what it is you do. If you were, say, an animation company versus a games company, if you were looking to make big AAA games, I might suggest something then. If you were going to work on more independent games, so there are many great locations in Ireland to be. For us, we ended up picking Galway. Galway is on the west coast of Ireland. It is, I don't know, Galway has an interesting, there's a saying about it. It's the black hole of ambition, which doesn't sound like a place you'd want to have a company for sure. But what they mean by that, what that phrase means, is that people love Galway. It is the place where Irish people go on vacation. And I certainly give it up to Dublin. It is the tech hub of Ireland. Everybody that you can imagine is there. But at the same time, places like Galway, like Cork, like Limerick, have a lot of creative talent, have studios, and there's a really vibrant culture, a vibrant creative culture here. So we set up our office, and I guess coming from Silicon Valley, in fairness, we expected to take a bit of a step down. When you're coming out of the place that defines tech for the rest of the world, or at least thinks it does, we expected it to be a little bit less. But here's, I guess, the secret is that actually it was a step up. And let me tell you the ways. First of all, we found ourselves, Ronan mentioned this, we had access to an amazing workforce, not just from the US, because obviously you can bring people from the US,
but also from all of the EU. And as well, Ireland is sort of ridiculously populated by programmers, which obviously for games companies is critically important. So we have not had any difficulty attracting any kind of talent here. It's been very easy, and everybody has said so far how the government makes it easy to get visas for people to come in, for experienced people. You could say that you could raise an eyebrow at that and wonder if that's the truth, but it really has been. We've hired a lot of people at this point, and we have not had a problem with it at all whatsoever. So that was the first thing, that we had no difficulty getting talent. Culturally, Ireland is fantastic. It is while Irish people will always slag the weather. I come from northern New York. And nobody can beat northern New York for just brutal weather. Secondly, having come from California, sure, it was hot there, but I actually really enjoy the weather in Ireland. It is consistent year-round. There's no crazy wild storms. It's a lovely place to live. The education system is exceptional. If you want a good quality of life, you like going out, having some fun, you enjoy shows, you enjoy just general culture, you enjoy being around happy people, this is absolutely the place to be. Ireland is known for that. It's weird to talk about that, I guess, when you're thinking about bringing tech companies here, but all the people in tech companies have lives, and they want to make sure that they set themselves up in a place in a place that people can enjoy and would want to come to, and Ireland is certainly that. We have, in terms of funding opportunities, there are ample funding opportunities here. And now here's an interesting thing. We have not actually availed of any of them, not because they're not there, but because having come from Silicon Valley, our costs were so lowered by coming to Ireland that it wasn't necessary for us to do that. So everything from the cost of our office rent to our office utilities to even the cost of employees, all of these we recognized significant savings moving here, which we were obviously thrilled with. It has been one of the things that we were concerned with, having come from the west coast of California. We were concerned that we may not have as close access to conferences and to the people we may needed to meet to publish games. We found out that's absolutely not the case at all. In fact, the biggest development show in the world takes place in Germany, Gamescom. So we've actually found it fantastic to be here for signing deals as well. I'm often asked, what is the downside? Like, what if I had to say, what is the one thing that I wish? The only thing I can think of is I miss Mexican food, but I wouldn't even slag the weather. We've been here 5 years now, so the honeymoon period is certainly off. We enjoy it. We like staying here. We're just about to renew our visa again and are planning to pursue citizenship. So I can't encourage it enough. We're really happy to be here. There's one other thing. There's one other thing that I wanted to add, which is if you are, Ireland also is very much a country of the rising tide will raise all ships. So I've found that companies here are happy to help other companies out, whether that's with tech or just advice or suggesting people who might be interesting potential hires. So there's a fantastic sense of community here as well. So as for us at this point in time, we have developed 3 different games, all in Ireland. From one was an expansion to the original Doom. Another one was a mobile phone game. And now we're about to release Empire of Sin, which is a big budget game that will be on consoles, PC, Mac, and the Switch. So we've developed across the full game spectrum here, and it's been fantastic. Nothing but good things to say. And that would be it for me. I look forward to questions, I guess, when we get to that point.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Brenda. That was really interesting, and I think from someone in industry to talk about your move to Ireland and scaling the company and how you've found it in Ireland, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. It's absolutely great. I'm not sure if Marina is still on the webinar. I think we might open it up to some Q&A, and I had just a look at the chat box function, and there are a few questions. So a couple of questions.
We do have some questions. The first one, I think it's
Sure.
for a Brazilian, what are the first steps to open a studio in Ireland? Great.
That's great. Yeah, and I saw that it was from, I think it was from Elena. So it's a great question, and it's certainly about. So IDA Ireland is here to help. So I mentioned that we help companies looking at internationalizing into Europe and educating them a bit more in Ireland and talking them through the process. It's a completely free service. It's a pro bono service on behalf of the Irish government. We actually have an office in Sao Paulo that covers all of our Brazil and Latin America operations. So my colleague Renata Buzon is on the call, and we'd be delighted to speak with you. So following this session, I am going to email my slides and email details of both myself and Renata to Marina. That'll be circulated to all guests at today's webinar, and then we can pick up discussions from there. That's okay. Is there any other questions, Marina? I can go through them here if you want. There's a few questions in Portuguese. I'm not able to. There's a question here from Daniel. Do we have offices in Chile? We don't, Daniel, but Renata and I lead our Latin America operations. And again, I'll share my email address and Renata's email address following the session. Delighted to speak with you and see how we can help.
Yeah, there's another one from Rafaela. She would like to know about the costs of opening a company, about immigration and the opening process as well.
Sure. So the process of establishing an entity in Ireland is actually quite straightforward. So from a legal framework perspective, Ireland is based off a common law system. So it's not overly expensive to register an entity and get that set up. I guess how you structure it and how you ramp it up, that's very much on a case-by-case basis. We have some kind of off-the-shelf introductory material on this, and again, we'd be delighted to send some of that over, and then perhaps have a discussion on what type of operation you'd like to establish.
And there is another one for Brenda. Is it possible to establish of exchange program between companies for women or diversity purpose, especially? Carolina is asking.
Yes, that's fascinating. I actually haven't thought about that at all. Certainly, if you know my background, it is an area that I talk about pretty much anytime anyone will give me a chance to talk about it. So yeah, our company is big on diversity. John is a native. He is Cherokee and Yaqui, and as a woman, diversity is one of the pillars of our company. So I hadn't ever thought about an exchange program for women, but yes, absolutely, consider me in. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Thanks, Brenda. There is another one, how to present a project to Irish animation companies.
Interesting one. Maybe Ronan.
Yeah, I can take that. A lot of companies won't take pitches, unless it comes through a lawyer or whatever. They you have to sort of get in touch with them. Sometimes meeting them at markets is the best place. And there's like a calendar of markets that take place from Kids Screen in Miami in February, which who knows whether, when we'll be back up and running, to there's a big one in 2 weeks' time, Cartoon Forum in Toulouse, which has gone online, and people pitch projects there. I would say the best thing, if you want to get in touch with an Irish animation company, is get in touch with Animation Ireland, and you'll see our website is just animationireland.com. Our 34-member studios are on there, and you'll get a feel for their sensibility because samples of our work are up there as well. So maybe if you came through us, we could put you in touch with somebody as well, and make that a bit easier for you. I just want to sort of comment on what Brenda was saying there as well, just in terms of gender balance. The animation sector, I know sometimes it's perceived as male dominated, but we're very much on the way to gender balance in the animation sector. We're about 43% female, 57% male at the moment, and pushing hard for 50-50. We have several really successful women-led companies. Pink Kong springs to mind, and another company called Daily Madness, and they're driven by women creative teams. And those women also are involved in women in animation. And even in terms of, you were talking about that exchange, I think women in animation might be a good way to, or a good organization to have a talk to about that. Because it's something it's very much front of mind in Ireland as well, and something we're very aware of. And just one other thing to touch on there, and it's fantastic when somebody like Brenda sells your country for you. It's absolutely brilliant. But totally. She is right about the collegiality of Ireland. I think it's because of our history, and because, you know, when Irish people went abroad, other Irish people would help you when you emigrated to get what we used to call get a start. So we still have that mentality where it's almost it's part of our DNA that you're obliged to help somebody else. So that's really good. And also the fact that we're a small country, it has its advantages too. Where our state agencies, our parliamentarians, they're all terribly agile and responsive. So if things can happen very quickly, it's not like the oil tanker. It like things can happen very quickly in Ireland if there's a need to get things changed, and getting access to the levers of power and people to make decisions, like that's not difficult either.
There is another one from Rafael. Which are the biggest game companies located in Dublin? And then he said, I mean, not only the biggest, but the most respected and interesting studios to look for job openings.
Sure. Well, I suppose some of the larger ones, I'm not sure, Brenda, if you want to, I mean, from an IDA client company perspective, Activision, Blizzard have operations in Ireland. They have a localization team, and they own a company called Demonware, which is in the middleware space. Riot Games on the esports side have an operation in Dublin. There's some really exciting Irish games companies that a sister agency of ours deal with, and they have operations scattered throughout Dublin. Digit Games, and I think Brenda mentioned them, they're one of the largest, and they do the full gambit of games development and localization and everything else. So there's a range of companies there. I'd be more than happy to send out a bit of info that we have to hand on that.
There is another one here. So there's Fernando Chames. Are there any kind of incentive from the government to make games in terms of money and or taxes incentives?
Yeah, so it would depend on the function. So I mentioned a bit about Ireland's low corporate tax rate, and that's more from a revenue perspective. For companies that are undertaking really novel development that may fall into a research and development category, there's a tax credit of 25%. That's essentially a 25% rebate on eligible expenditure. Depending on the project and depending on the function, there also are potential cash grant packages available from IDA Ireland. And this all comes from an EU state aid pot of money. So we work with numerous companies, mostly outside of Dublin, that scale up operations, and there are cash grant packages there to help them get ramped up and so forth. Again, I'm planning on putting together just a kind of a takeaway information pack. I'll be sure to include a slide that provides just a bit more of an overview on that. But yes, there are some mechanisms and schemes that are available.
Okay.
Conor, can I jump in here again just to say that yeah, Animation Ireland, we liaise with the other representative bodies, so Screen Producers Ireland, which represents the live action, but we also liaise with IMERT. and they represent the games companies. Now, obviously, Connor works for a state agency, so can't comment on this. But I know that IMERT are running a campaign at the moment to try and have the Section 481 tax credit, to have that extended to the games industry as well. Which again, not to, but like that could change the industry if that happens as well. I know that's definitely something that they're pushing for, but I'm just not sure in the context of the sort of the expenses of the pandemic or not, whether that'll happen. But just to let you know that that's in the background.
No, it's a really good point, Ronan, and for those that mightn't be aware, Section 481 is Ireland's production tax credit. So it's depending on what type of project you're doing, there's 30% of a potential tax rebate there on qualifying expenditure. Currently, companies that are doing live action projects or are doing sort of kind of direct animation can leverage this support. But again, to Ronan's point, it'd be fantastic to get this widened to include games development also.
Yeah, and I'm a Dubliner, born and bred, Connor. So I don't like bigging up Galway, but just to Brenda's point about how fantastic Galway is, it also has an extra 5% on the Section 481. There's a regional development uplift for Galway as well. So if Brenda didn't sell it to you, I mean the 5% might help.
There is another one. What about the venture capital environment for investments in game studios in Ireland? Are there any strategy related to this kind of matchmaking? It's from Oliveira.
I can take that. So,
sure.
Romero Games, at least I can start this. Romero Games, we are self-funded. So we have not sought investment. That said, that doesn't mean investors aren't seeking us out attempting to invest. I tend to, I don't know necessarily whether the investors who have sought us out are EU based. So it feels to me that it's a healthy ecosystem over here. I do know some companies have received investment, but I just want to say it's not something that we have sought. So I can't answer the question directly, but I do know that there's certainly attempts to invest in Irish companies.
Great.
Connor, would you like to say anything else? I have more
Sure. Sorry, I was just going to add on the sort of VC and funding side, it would be more with our sister agency, Enterprise Ireland. They are a similar agency to us, but essentially they do the inverse of what we do. They work with smaller companies, typically Irish headquartered, Irish scaling companies. Oftentimes invest directly in those companies. They invest equity stakes in those companies. They have a high potential startup unit that's very active in this space. So from a kind of a state agency perspective, we're active in that space and always trying to get more active.
Okay, there's another one. So I know Sweden and Denmark have a joint program to hire international professionals and help them get settled as they are from abroad. What drew my attention is that they have a section dedicated to game industry. Does Ireland have anything like that?
Nothing that I'm aware of that's dedicated to the games industry. I mentioned a bit during my talk earlier on in the session that we are pro-immigration of skilled folks from outside the EU. And we have set up, quite an agile visa and work permit system. So it's very much on a company by company basis. So IDA has what's called a trusted partner mechanism for companies that have essentially been vetted. So for a number of the larger, more established games companies, if they're looking for certain roles that they want to hire someone from outside the EU, we can help them fast track and essentially expedite that application through our immigration system and try and get a quick turnaround on that applicant.
Okay, there's another one. Is it more expensive to hire professionals in Ireland? And there is more questions about what's the cost of living compared to other big cities, and the salaries and fees, what range is in Ireland, and the currency, is it euro in Ireland?
Euro, yeah. I saw a few questions on that. Maybe I might start, and then maybe Brenda, given she's working on the coal face with an actual company, can pitch in. So yeah, currency is the euro. We're the only English-speaking member of the euro. From a cost perspective, from an overall cost perspective, Ireland isn't a low-cost jurisdiction. Certainly not a kind of a low-cost offshore jurisdiction. From a cost perspective, somewhat similar to the UK, not as expensive as London. Certainly not as expensive as some US cities, the likes of the San Franciscos and New Yorks and Seattles of the world. But it ain't cheap. Dublin, it would be, I suppose, across the board, 15 to 20% less expensive than London, if you're talking about talent and real estate. Well, real estate maybe less so now, given that a lot of people are working remotely with the pandemic, and talent. I think for some of the mid to higher tier talent, particularly in engineering and development, a lot of those people demand a certain wage, a certain package. There's a kind of a global premium on some of this type of talent. But I can sense some high level facts and figures over on costs. Dublin would be the most expensive part of Ireland. And then typically if you get to cities like Galway or Limerick or Cork, there might be a kind of a 15 to perhaps 20% cost differential across the board. I don't know, Brenda, if you've anything to add there.
So when we were making our decision about where we would locate, we evaluated all of those things. And one of the reasons we did not locate in Dublin was that we found it was, it is a premium location, which everything goes with that, from housing to office space. In here, our first office, we moved from the west coast of the US to the west coast of Ireland. Our office rent in California was $14,000 a month. When we moved here, it was $1,000 a month. So we had a 10 overall, gosh, I can't remember what it exactly was, but I want to say that our overall burn rate went down to 1/10 of what it originally was. Now, mind you, we were coming from the Silicon Valley, but there, you can actually, a lot of those figures are available online, just in terms of office space, in terms of utilities. So I find everything from salaries to office space and utilities, all of that, it was significantly lower. But again, we were coming from the Bay Area in California.
Great.
So then there's some questions about job application. The job application form for foreigners wanting to move to Ireland is between the company and the person, or the process starts with IDA. And there's another one that's saying that I see that Brenda and her partner works together with games. So I would like to know about the immigration process to partners who don't work with games. How is the process for them to looking for a different job? I don't know if you can help with this one.
Sure.
Well, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Brenda. Sorry, I was just going to say, typically would be between the company and an individual. So if a company has a certain role, typically it would be a kind of a mid-level and above type role, not a very junior level role. They can, if they're offering the role to someone outside the EU, then a state agency like IDA can step in and help expedite the application. When I say that typically it's not for junior roles, we essentially have to try and demonstrate to a government department that this company needs, it's critical that they need this individual to work in the operation in Ireland because they're proficient in something or they're really core to the operation. Because the department might come back and say, well, there's plenty of similar candidates. If it's a very basic customer support role, for example, there's many candidates out there, not only in Ireland, but across the EU. So on a case-by-case basis, but the likes of IDA are here to help and advise on a best course of action.
There is another one for you, Connor. Can you back to the first slide and explain why there are so many high-tech companies established in Ireland? What attracts them? I know you
Sure.
Can you please go over it again?
Sure. Yeah, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pull up the site. I suppose it goes back decades, and I was conscious not to get too much into the economic history of Ireland. It started very much with US investment into Ireland back in the 1970s and 1980s. So back then, Ireland was very much a low-cost offshore jurisdiction, and a lot of the US tech companies that needed a beachhead into Europe would have established operations in Ireland. Back then, it would have been around manufacturing and assembly. So the likes of Apple actually established their first international office in Ireland back in 1981, would you believe? And now they employ about 5,000 people there. Microsoft established in Ireland in 1985, Intel in 1989. And over since then, Ireland has reinvented itself. We entered a period of kind of economic prosperity and sort of rising tides from the late 90s onwards. And then we essentially priced ourselves out of some of the more basic manufacturing assembly type projects that would have went to Eastern Europe, for example, or elsewhere in the world. And we started competing for services type projects. So companies would have established shared services centers, EU headquarters, and then from there try to move up that value chain in terms of winning higher value added functions, showcasing all of the talent. The corporate tax rate certainly helps. A lot of the larger companies, it is part of why they're here. Having that low corporate tax rate, having an international presence in Ireland, and being able to structure it there from an efficient perspective. It's multifaceted, but ultimately going back to that track record, Ireland is a location where companies can scale, serve international markets, and they have that very attractive backbone from a fiscal perspective and a very attractive corporate tax rate. I hope that explains it. And we're English speaking as well. So I think another point, and Brenda, given she's born and raised in the US, and we often say in Ireland that we're closer to Boston than Berlin. So not to get too US centric on it, there is a strong cultural diaspora between Ireland and the US. So I think, and it was predominantly North America companies that would have set up in Ireland initially. From a cultural perspective, there was a comfort level there. We were English speaking. They could kind of understand us. It was a fun place to set up, and again, all of the other points that I mentioned just there.
Are there the overall corporate taxes applied for game studios, and are there any corporate taxes incentives for the game industry? And then Eliane is also asked, what's the corporate tax rate?
The corporate tax rate is 12.5%, and the great thing about that is that it's a clear, transparent rate. So it doesn't matter if you're a very small enterprise, even a corner shop selling groceries, or if you're a very large multinational. That's the rate that applies to all trading companies in Ireland. And then there are some other incentives that we touched on, and both Brendan and Ronan mentioned that we're trying to up the ante in terms of tax credits for games development in Ireland. There's really attractive incentives around research and development, a 25% tax credit. Also from an IP perspective, a lot of companies in online technology and in games and other areas have utilized Ireland as a jurisdiction to onshore IP, and over time that can be a very fiscally efficient way of structuring things. And part of what we do in IDA is introduce companies to professional service providers across tax and legal and recruitment and banking and a whole bunch of other areas. So if a company and any person on the call would like to have a detailed discussion on any of these areas, we're here and we're on hand to point you in the right direction.
Okay, I think we can finish, and I would like to say thanks. And I don't know if you have some final words, you and the guests, before we finished.
I'd just like to thank you, Marina, for putting this together. And again, in these challenging times, not being able to go out and physically host conferences or seminars or even meet companies face to face, it is useful to have this type of platform. And what we're trying to do is essentially just showcase Ireland as a location for games companies. And I hope this has given you a good flavor of what Ireland has to offer and some of the exciting stuff that's happening here. And I just really want to thank Brenda Romero for taking time out of her busy schedule to showcase a bit about what Romero Games are doing and her path to Ireland. And also Ronan McCabe from Animation Ireland, providing an overview on the animation and audiovisual scene in Ireland. So thanks again.
And if anybody wants to reach out to me, my email is just my name. It's just brenda@romero.com. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and the same here, ronan.mccabe@animationireland.com. And again, we're open for business and would love to explore opportunities for our members with Brazilian companies. And thanks, Connor and Brenda. Thanks for inviting me on here as well today. And lovely to meet you all.
Of course, and listen, that's fantastic. And again, we'll send a follow-up package to all attendees. It'll have the email details of myself and my colleague Renata, who's our Brazil and Latin America lead. Look forward to having some discussions with you over the coming weeks. Thanks again. That's great. I think that's a wrap. Thanks very much, folks. Good to see you all. Bye-bye.
Todo mundo indo embora, olha lá, Marina.